Hey guys, this is Steph from KNS Diesel. I'm going to show you guys how I swapped in a Dodge cluster into a Chevy pickup. Let's check it out. Alright, this is the cluster from a 2010 to 12 Dodge truck. This was pretty much made to fit in a OBS style Chevy pickup from from 95 to 98, some years stretched into 2000. This truck's a 2000, but still an OBS. So essentially what we made here, we made a 3D printed adapter that this cluster just clips into. This way you can use the mounting of the factory Chevy cluster and just clip in the Dodge cluster into that bracket. So I decided to do a 3D scan of the cluster itself. This way I could assure proper fitment and the fact that once this thing's clipped in, nothing will move. Essentially, so this is the clip here. So these clips, essentially, there's quite a few of them all around the cluster. There's one. There's probably 4 at the bottom, 2 on the sides, 2 on the angles, and then 2 more on the top. So essentially the way the bracket is designed is that, let's hide the cluster here for a second. Let's go into detail. You have a ridge here that pretty much contours the whole cluster. So essentially what that does, that sits on this edge and then holds it from sliding side to side, back to back, top to top. So the only thing you do need is the clips to physically hold it into that bracket. So we ended up doing something like that. And then we utilized the factory mounting holes in the dash. We needed to do a filler here because essentially this filler is where the issue lied on the dash of the Chevy, because the dash kind of goes out and then turns. So there have been 2 holes here. So we need to do the filler. For sake of, parts changing or anything that happens to this thing later down the road, I can simply just unclip this cluster from this bracket and clip a new one back in, and away you go. So essentially, this is the design, fully completed. It took me about 3 attempts, some test printing, to massage the design, and then, yeah, it turned out really well. So essentially I went ahead and I built it in real life. So this is a hybrid design. So this is not the actual end design, but this is a hybrid design of what's you see on the computer. From what I learned on this design, I finalized it on the PC. So if I ever have to build it again, it'll be like easy breezy. So essentially, as you can see, this is 3D printed with ABS. You can see the clips. And then for the glass, I decided to use a piece of acrylic. I heated it with a heat gun, bent it into shape. And once I got that done, I sanded pretty much a little bit past the edge here with a block. I sanded it with 80 grit sandpaper on the glass, and then the plastic part itself. And then I decided to use some plastic bonding epoxy. And then I put a very thin layer, that way it wouldn't ooze out too much, all in the contour. And then I just held it together with a bunch of plastic spring clips till it dried. It has about a 15-minute setup, this epoxy, so by the time I slapped the glass on, it was starting to tack up already, which is perfect. That finishes up the assembly. If we bring the assembly to the truck, there's a few things that we have to do on the truck side for the cluster to fit, and that would have been these holes here. So these holes aren't here from factory. So this is the harness from the Dodge truck. So these holes are made, so then the connectors, once the dash sits in there, the connectors have somewhere to sit. Otherwise, the assembly, it won't be deep enough at all. So you have to make these cuts in order to fit that cluster in there. This bigger hole here that you'll see here, this was for something else prior to this upgrade. So this hole is just there now. So then this gets placed in there, just like this. And then you have the mounting holes, and then it gets screwed in just like that. So there's one thing that needs to be done on the cluster side as well, but it's not a modification. Essentially, you just have to unclip the back cover for the circuit board, or else it's too deep. So you'll have the circuit board showing like this. It was in the truck prior to this, just like this, for a year and a half, so it was fine. So I took the circuit board out, not the circuit board out, but the plastic protector for the circuit board off, and I've been leaving it like this to fit it. There's actually, now that I'm remembering, 2 tabs I had to grind off. There's a tab here and a tab here. I just took like a roll-lock disc and I just zipped it off to make it flush. And that was to hold that plastic lid on there. So essentially, if I want to clip this on, essentially it's really easy. Oh, and I did drill a little hole here, and I'll explain to you that a little later. So you flip it upside down. Sorry, I'm trying to one-hand this. And then it sits nice and tight in there. Sure all the clips are clicked in, just like that. And now, we have a beautiful cluster assembly. So as you can tell, it's nice and tight. Cluster sits in its ridge. And yeah, so now you have a part that you don't need to modify. It clicks in. If there's something that goes wrong with it, you can unclick it, click a new one in, away you go. The first generation of this, I had used the factory bezel. I'd put it in and I made a contour out of lamecoid. And then I glued that contour to the cluster, and then I glued the factory bezel to the contour. And then over time, essentially just, it was a mess and it came all apart, and yeah. So yeah, so as you can see, the hole here that I drilled for the trip, the rod, you can see I can't get into it. So essentially what happens there is I took the rod from the factory cluster. So mine was a 95 to 98 cluster. So I went all the way in, I cut it, threw this in my drill press, ran a file square on this stub here to pretty much put in a step on it. And then doing that, I was able to then drill this hole inside the cluster assembly. And I made sure that I didn't file it down too low, so it wasn't loose. If you end up doing it, you could also use an epoxy to hold it in there, but mine is a press fit. So when you put it in there, mine is kind of not bottomed out just yet, and then you gotta kind of push it in and turn, and then it bottoms out. So now I can lift the cluster. That's how much of a press fit it is. And now I have my button sticking out, so now I could circle through my trip A and B and my odometer. So then this finalizes the assembly. So now we can take it and put it in the vehicle, bolt it in, and now you have a 2010 to 12 cluster that is direct bolting to this truck. Now I'm gonna bolt this in because I can't hold the camera and bolt this in at the same time, but I'll show you what it looks like. So now you see I have it bolted in, so factory mounting. And then this is what it looks like. So as you can see, you can pull on this, it doesn't come out. Then if you were to turn it on, so this is the overview of the cluster. As you can see, it fits really well. So that's that bracket. It's pretty hidden. You don't actually get to see it much. It's pretty flush with this. You get to see the triangle piece a little bit to fill in that contour. So when you turn it on, everything works. The only thing is that you can see is that when you're actually sitting back, the indicator lights are hidden, but that can easily be solved by just finishing off the trimming of this plastic bezel, which I decided not to. I kind of already know like what's park and neutral just by pulling it down. There's no 2 and 1 on this, so all the way down is D. So our 1 down is reverse, so after a while you just don't have to look at an indicator. And then manual mode, you have 1 through 6. And then for the top, you can see as well, ultra low sulfur is kind of hidden when you look back at it, just because the fitment of the contours are just not big enough from the Chevy dash here. But otherwise, widthness, well, it fits really well for the width. Looks kind of stylish too with the chrome and stuff, so I kind of dig it. And as well, if anything happens in the cluster, it just clicks in and out of that bracket, and you can just change it without having to MacGyver a bunch of stuff. So yeah, hope you guys like it. Hope you guys enjoy this video. This is KNS Diesel.